The air over Oahu was clean that morning, so clean it seemed impossible that the world could ever be at war. The sun had just risen over the Koolau Range, washing the palm trees and the Navy barracks at Pearl Harbor in gold. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Most of the men were still asleep, others shaving or getting ready for church, a few hung over from a Saturday night in Honolulu. Corporal James Jimmy Lawson was 22 years old, an Army airman assigned to Hickam Field. He'd been stationed in Hawaii for just under a year, long enough for the island to start feeling like home. The base was alive with the lazy rhythm of a peacetime morning. Breakfast smells drifting from the mess hall, the occasional rumble of a training plane overhead, the soft clatter of typewriters from the command building. In his bunkhouse, Jimmy sat at his small wooden desk, writing a letter to his mother back in Kansas. "Don't worry about me, Ma. This place is paradise. The Navy boys like to say we've got the best posting in the world. Sometimes I think they're right." He paused to listen. Somewhere down the hall, a radio was playing Chattanooga Choo Choo. A few of the guys were still asleep, one snoring loud enough to rattle the tin cup on the desk. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you never notice until it's gone. Outside, the harbor gleamed under the morning sun. Battleship Row, the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, and others floated in quiet formation, their gray hulls mirrored in the still water. The American flag rippled lazily above the Arizona. Jimmy glanced at his watch, 7:48 a.m. He yawned, stretched, and looked out the window toward the horizon. A faint drone drifted through the air. He frowned. "We got training flights on a Sunday?" At first, nobody paid much attention. The sound grew louder, but the island often hosted drills. Some men even stepped outside to watch the exercise. Then the first explosions hit. From the direction of Battleship Row came a thunderous boom that shook the ground. Jimmy froze. The window rattled. The coffee cup toppled. He jumped to his feet, heart pounding. "Jesus, what the hell was that?" someone shouted from the next bunk. They ran outside. Above Hickam Field, black smoke blossomed into the sky. In the distance, planes swooped low over the harbor, sunlight glinting off their wings. The sound was deafening, the scream of engines, the crack of anti-aircraft fire, the hollow thud of bombs striking steel. For a heartbeat, the men stared in disbelief. Then one shouted, "Those aren't ours!" The rising sun insignia flashed red on the wings. Japanese. The first wave had begun. From his vantage point, Jimmy saw a formation of dive bombers streaking toward the harbor. Sirens wailed across the base, and men scattered for cover. At Hickam, bombs rained down on the airfield, tearing through the barracks and setting planes ablaze before they could even leave the ground. He dove behind a sandbag wall as the world erupted. The concussive force of a nearby explosion knocked him to the dirt. Bits of gravel and hot metal showered down. "Get to the hangars," his sergeant yelled. "We need to arm the planes." He scrambled to his feet, sprinting across the tarmac as bullets stitched the ground. Japanese fighters strafed the runway, their machine guns flashing. Men fell all around him. The smell of fuel filled the air. He reached a hangar where a few mechanics were dragging out a damaged P-40. The tires were shredded, but its engine was intact. "Get her in the air," someone yelled. "Can't! No ammo loaded yet." They ducked as another bomb whistled down and detonated nearby. The blast hurled them backward. His ears rang. The hangar collapsed in flames. He coughed, eyes stinging from smoke. Through the haze he saw the harbor, a vision of hell. Battleships burning, sailors leaping into oil-slicked water. The Arizona had been struck amidships. A column of fire and debris shot skyward, followed by a deep, terrible rumble. He didn't know it then, but more than 1,000 men had just died in that instant. Across the harbor, chaos reigned. Men on the West Virginia and California fought to contain fires. The Oklahoma rolled over completely, trapping hundreds inside. From the shore, Jimmy could see sailors clinging to overturned hulls, waving, shouting for help. Some tried to swim through burning oil. Few made it. At Hickam Field, medical teams rushed into the open, pulling the wounded to safety. Trucks loaded with stretchers sped toward the base hospital, already overflowing. Jimmy helped drag a man from the wreckage, his uniform torn, face blackened by soot. The man was barely conscious. "Hang on, buddy. You're all right. You're all right." But he wasn't. The soldier's eyes rolled back, and he went still. The reality hit like a blow to the gut. This wasn't a drill. This was war. By 8:30 a.m., the first wave had passed, leaving behind a smoking wasteland. The men caught their breath, dazed and bloodied. Some thought it was over. Then came the second wave. More bombers swept in from the north, targeting dry docks, hangars, and remaining ships. Anti-aircraft guns barked from the shore, but most were unmanned or destroyed. Jimmy took shelter near a fuel depot, clutching a rifle he'd pulled from a fallen guard. He fired at the sky, a futile gesture, but it felt better than doing nothing. All around, America's Pacific Fleet was being torn apart. By mid-morning, the assault ended as suddenly as it began. The Japanese planes banked away and vanished to the sea, leaving behind a blackened harbor and nearly 2,400 dead Americans. Silence followed, the stunned, heavy kind that comes after catastrophe. Jimmy stood amid the ruins of Hickam Field, smoke rising all around. He couldn't hear much beyond the ringing in his ears. The letter he had been writing that morning still sat on his desk in the barracks. He thought of his mother, of Kansas, of the peaceful sunrise that had felt like any other. He had no idea the world had just changed forever.
When the second wave came, Jimmy almost didn't believe it. The first assault had left Hickam Field in ruins, hangars burning, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and cordite. But as the wail of engines rose again from the north, the men realized the nightmare wasn't over. "Down! Everyone down!" someone screamed. The sky filled with the whine of bombs. The Japanese pilots flew low, methodical, precise. They weren't after ships this time. They wanted to finish off the planes, the fuel tanks, the men who were still standing. Jimmy dove behind an overturned jeep as the ground erupted. Shrapnel tore through the air, slicing into the palm trees that lined the runway. A mechanic he'd been helping seconds earlier was thrown off his feet, his body landing hard on the pavement. Jimmy crawled to him, but the man didn't move. He forced himself to look away. If he stopped now, if he froze, he'd die too. Across the field, an anti-aircraft gun barked to life. The crew, barely half-trained, managed to fire a few bursts before a Zero banked in and strafed them. The gun exploded in a flash of light. Jimmy could feel the heat from 200 yards away. He clutched his rifle, useless against the sky. For a brief second, one of the planes roared low enough that he could see the pilot's goggles, the rising sun insignia glowing on the fuselage. The pilot's face was calm, focused, professional. Jimmy raised the rifle and fired anyway, again and again, until the clip ran dry. The shots went wide, swallowed by the roar of engines. At the harbor, the devastation grew worse by the minute. The Arizona was still burning. Its ammunition magazine had detonated at 8:06 a.m., splitting the ship in two. The explosion was so massive that windows shattered miles away. A shock wave rippled across the water, flipping small boats and setting oil slicks ablaze. The Oklahoma had rolled completely over. The West Virginia was sinking. The California lay smoldering, her decks awash in fire. Sailors leapt into the harbor to escape the inferno. Some swam through burning fuel, others never resurfaced. From where Jimmy stood, he could see columns of black smoke rising thousands of feet into the air. It looked like the end of the world. By 8:45 a.m., the base hospital was overflowing. Jimmy joined a group of men carrying stretchers from the airfield to the docks. The wounded came in waves, burned, bloodied, missing limbs. Nurses worked with bare hands, doctors performing surgery on the floor, using whiskey for antiseptic when the morphine ran out. "Put him here," one nurse said, pointing to a patch of floor already soaked in blood. Jimmy laid him down, a sailor from the Nevada, still in his life jacket. His skin was blistered, his eyes glazed. "What's your name, son?" the nurse asked. The sailor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He coughed once, then went still. The nurse pressed her lips together and moved on to the next. Jimmy turned away. The room spun. The smell of burned flesh was everywhere. Outside, the attack had finally ended. The Japanese planes were gone, heading north across the ocean. But the sound, that roaring in his ears, didn't stop. At 9:15, a rumor swept through the base. Japanese paratroopers were landing on Oahu. Men grabbed rifles, set up defensive positions, scanning the hills. Every shadow looked like an enemy soldier. It turned out to be false. There were no paratroopers, but the fear was real. Nobody knew if another wave was coming. Nobody knew if an invasion was next. In the chaos, a commander shouted for volunteers to head toward the harbor to assist with rescue operations. Jimmy raised his hand before he could think. He joined a small truck convoy heading toward Battleship Row. As they neared the water, the scale of destruction became clear. Ships still burned, thick black smoke hanging over the bay. The Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, had tried to escape but was run aground to avoid blocking the channel. Her hull was riddled with holes. Sailors in small boats were pulling survivors from the water. Others stood along the shoreline staring in disbelief. The Arizona was still burning, flames licking at the twisted metal. The smell of oil and death filled the air. Jimmy's group joined a rescue team near the capsized Oklahoma. Dozens of sailors were trapped inside the hull, pounding desperately from within. "We can hear them," one officer said grimly. "We're cutting through the bottom, but it's slow going." The sound, metallic hammering from inside the ship, was haunting. Jimmy helped pass tools down the line, hands shaking as he worked. They could hear voices faintly beneath the steel. A few hours later, they managed to cut through a section and pull several men out alive. Others weren't so lucky. When one of the rescued sailors finally emerged, he gasped at the sunlight, eyes wide. "We thought you forgot us," he whispered. Jimmy had no words. He just put his hand on the man's shoulder. By late afternoon, the fires still raged. The once pristine harbor was a floating graveyard. Over 180 aircraft had been destroyed. The Pacific Fleet lay crippled. 8 battleships damaged or sunk, 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers hit, countless lives lost. But in the midst of the wreckage, something shifted. Orders came down from Washington. All leaves canceled. Prepare for war. Men who had been stunned into silence began to move again with purpose. Radios crackled with messages from across the Pacific. Rumors swirled that President Roosevelt would address the nation the next day. Jimmy sat on a crate near the water, exhausted, covered in soot. He looked out at the still burning ships, the American flag above the harbor, tattered but still standing. A chaplain walked by murmuring a prayer over a line of bodies covered with blankets. Jimmy whispered one of his own. Not for victory, not yet. Just for strength to make it through the night. That night, the island went dark. A full blackout was ordered in case the Japanese returned. Searchlights probed the sky. Soldiers manned the beaches with rifles and bayonets. Jimmy lay awake on a cot outside the base hospital, listening to the distant hiss of burning oil. Every few minutes, someone would cough or cry out in their sleep. He couldn't stop thinking about the sound of hammering from inside the Oklahoma, the helpless pounding of trapped men. He thought of his letter, still unfinished on his desk. The last words he had written, "Don't worry about me, Ma." He closed his eyes, too tired to cry. The paradise he had described was gone.